In today's video, going to be going over 3 polls that have been released over the past couple of days that are taking a look at that 2020 national picture of the Democratic primary. And if you'd like to take a look at all of this data for yourself, I'll link these articles at the bottom of the video description. Now, we had a couple of big ones come out today, those being from Quinnipiac as well as Monmouth. And all of these national polls, they're starting to show a similar narrative right now where you have Biden consistently in first place. Sanders has been gaining and kind of pushing into a stronger second place. Warren is still competitive and within the realm of being right there with Sanders, but she has certainly taken a step back in recent weeks. And then Buttigieg, it looks like just over the past week or so, he's starting to show a little bit more weakness than where we had been seeing from Buttigieg. He's been getting a little bit more critical press coverage after the rise that we'd seen from him in the polls, and it seems like he is falling back a bit as a result, but in a consistent fourth place. And we could potentially be heading towards a situation in primary season where it gets down to a Biden versus Sanders matchup. Now, there's still potentially time for Warren to regain some of that lost ground, and maybe she can push her way back into this thing, but at least that's where the trend lines have been over the past couple of weeks. And really, a Biden versus Sanders matchup would be extremely similar to what we saw in 2016 in the Clinton versus Sanders primary. So, starting off here with the Quinnipiac poll, and we can see Biden leading the way at 29%, followed by Sanders at 17%. Warren also very competitive in this one with Sanders in third place at 15%, and then Buttigieg there at 9 percentage points. If we take a look, the black support is definitely behind Joe Biden there at 51%, where you have Sanders and Warren at 13 and 12 percentage points respectively. And then not a huge surprise where you have Pete Buttigieg only able to register 2 percentage points among that group, where the white vote, it's a bit more competitive, where you have Biden at 21, Sanders at 18, Warren at 17, and Buttigieg at 14 percentage points. And we go down and take a look at the age demographics, and it is actually pretty astounding the differences between the ages in the Democratic primary. So 18 to 34, Sanders gets 52% of that vote, Warren at 17, Buttigieg only gets 2% of that vote. Very unpopular among the younger voters, which actually wasn't the case as much for Buttigieg earlier on in this process when he pretended more so to be a progressive. But now that he's taken that centrist lane, his support among the younger age demographic has cratered. Then you see Yang there at 7%, where he does quite a bit better with that younger crowd. Warren at 17% and Biden at 11%. And with Yang doing decently well among the younger voters in comparison to the older age demographics, if there's ever a point where he bows out of the race or it looks like he's not going to be a serious factor, that could possibly be a big boost for somebody like a Bernie Sanders in that particular instance, and especially because they're going after a similar demographic there. Now, going over to the more middle tier age groups, and we can see it becomes a little bit more competitive. Now, once we get to 50 to 64, this is where Sanders really drops off down to 6%, and then 65 and older, he's only registering 2 percentage points, which is pretty devastatingly terrible, where Biden, he consistently climbs as you get to those older demographics. With the 65 plus, he's pulling in 47% of that support. It's just fascinating, the differences in the age demographics of the Democratic electorate and where they're at in terms of support for these different candidates. It's just such a stark contrast. So then I want to move down and take a look at where the polls are trending. So typically with these Quinnipiac polls, they've been a little bit less favorable towards Sanders and maybe to a little lesser of extent Biden in comparison to their average national numbers from the other polls. And in general, they've been a little bit more positive towards Warren and Buttigieg. So the fact that Sanders and Biden are in first and second place and gain quite a bit from where they were in the last poll just a couple of weeks ago, it's actually a really positive sign for them, where in the later portion of November, since that point, Biden gaining 5 points and Sanders gaining 4 points. We also take a look here at Elizabeth Warren, where she was doing extremely well for actually a pretty good period of time there between the months of September and October, where she was approaching 30 and actually reaching 30 percentage points in the upper 20s. But then we've seen this backtrack from her where she dipped down to 14% and kind of right in that similar range here, 15% in these updated numbers. But the really bad sign here is for Buttigieg. Like I said, he's been getting a little bit more critical coverage, and he had that meteoric rise in recent polls, he went up to 10%, then 16% in the last one, which was good enough for second place, but cratering down 7 percentage points from just a couple of weeks ago, where Buttigieg is now only grabbing 9 percentage points. And with this Quinnipiac poll, I also want to take a look at the percentage of individuals who are making up their mind at this point in time or might change their vote. It's the strongest for Bernie, with those who have made up their mind at 48%, followed by Biden really close there at 46%. The Warren and Buttigieg voters are definitely more up for grabs than those that are behind Biden and Sanders. And that's not a great thing by any means for Warren and Buttigieg, because they have less committed supporters, and the fact that they're already in third and fourth place behind Biden and Sanders means that it's going to be a little bit tougher for them to try to catch up to the top tier candidates. Those that might change their mind are at 52% for Biden, 51% for Sanders, 68% for Warren, and 80% for Buttigieg. And in terms of the second choice among these candidates, we see Warren does the best here at 16%. And then it's actually pretty close among these upper tier candidates, where you have Biden at 13, Sanders at 11, as well as Buttigieg also there at 11. And I also, just to wrap up this Quinnipiac poll, wanted to take a look at how these upper tier Democratic hopefuls are doing against Donald Trump. So we see 51% for Biden, 42% for Trump. And pretty similar, Sanders at 51% to Trump, who's at 43%. Warren at 50%, Trump 43%. And then Buttigieg does the worst, but still leading Trump 48% to 43%. Now I want to go over and take a look at some numbers here out of this new Monmouth poll. And actually, Trump is showing a little bit more strength in terms of when they ask the question, do you think that Donald Trump should be reelected, or should it be someone else? Still, more people think it should be someone else at 54%, compared to 43% who think he should be reelected. But these are some better numbers than where we had been seeing him for most of this past year, where he was tending to be in the upper 30 percentage point range. Now he's in the lower 40s with that should be reelected number. And now the Democratic National 2020 Democratic primary numbers here have Biden leading the way, gaining 3 points from the prior poll from the previous month of November. He's in first place at 26%. Bernie gaining a point and in a solid second place here at 21%. And then Warren taking another one of these steps back that we've seen from her over the past month or so. She was at 23%, now at 17%. And then Buttigieg going back 1 percentage point. He was at 9, now he's at 8 points. Bloomberg, this is the first result that he's been in a Monmouth poll, and he starts right at 5%, Klobuchar at 4%, Yang at 3%. And you can see how the rest of the field does after that. So we're seeing a situation here where Biden getting a little bit of a bump along with Sanders, although the Sanders bump only here is 1%, really specifically for Sanders, where he had cratered back in September to 15%. He's shown a bit more strength since then, now getting up to 21% and passing Elizabeth Warren for the first time in a Monmouth poll since we go all the way back to August. They were tied, but even in June, Warren had a lead. So really going all the way back to May, the month of May was the last time that Sanders had a lead over Warren, and that was 15 to 10 percentage points. Since that point in time, either Warren's had a lead or they've been tied. Now it's a situation where Sanders has opened up a 4-point lead over Warren in the month of December. And taking a look at the favorability of these candidates, they're actually really positive among the top 3 individuals specifically, where Biden's grabbing 76% favorable to 20% unfavorable. And these are among Democratic and Democratic leaners. Sanders is at 74% favorable to 21% unfavorable. And then actually the best numbers here coming from Warren at 76% favorable to 15% unfavorable. Buttigieg, there's still more people out there who haven't formed an opinion about him. He's at 53% favorable to 18% unfavorable. Bloomberg, just showing how tough it's going to be for him. The fact that, in general, he's not doing so great with these favorable unfavorables, where he's at 40% favorable to 39% unfavorable. And then they also put Andrew Yang in here. He's at 42% favorable to 17% unfavorable. And those are the 2 polls that just came out today. Very reputable sources from Quinnipiac and Monmouth. Now, to wrap things up, I just want to take a look at a RealClearPolitics polling that it came out either yesterday or the day before. Now, these numbers were actually pulled a few weeks ago, back in the month of November, but going towards the back half of the month of November. But nonetheless, they're actually showing some similar numbers to what we were seeing in the prior 2 polls, where Biden leading the pack at 30%, followed by Sanders at 23%. And then you have Elizabeth Warren in third place at 12%, Buttigieg at 6%. And then we can see that Kamala Harris was in this one before she had dropped out at 4%, along with Andrew Yang. And what I also wanted to take a look at here was the matchups between these upper-tier Democratic hopefuls and Donald Trump. And they're doing pretty well for themselves, where we have Biden a 12-point lead over Trump, Warren a 9-point lead, Sanders also a 12-point lead over Trump, where he gets 52% to Trump at 40%. Buttigieg, another one of these polls where he's not doing as well in that head-to-head matchup, and part of that is just simply the fact that he doesn't have as much name recognition as most, clearly these other candidates. Warren, Sanders, and Biden have quite a bit more name recognition than Buttigieg, but that's probably not the only factor that's built into this for Buttigieg. The fact that he's limited on his experience, he's relatively young, that could also be hurting him in this head-to-head, but he still has a 5-point lead nonetheless in this one. And then wrapping things up with Kamala Harris, of course she stepped down, but she had a 6-point lead over Trump. And then they asked the question, if the general election for Congress in your district was held today, would you vote for the Democrat or the Republican? And this is a really positive sign for the Democrats, where they're at 50% support for Congress as opposed to the Republicans at 38%, a 12 percentage point gap in that support. So that's the poll that I wanted to wrap things up with here, that Real Clear Politics one. And again, if you want to take a look at all these polls for yourself, I'll link them down at the bottom of the video description. I appreciate you guys stopping by, and consider subscribing for more of this content in the future. Hope to see you back here for my next video.